Now that I have gone, picked this as my topic of the year, I really need to change this to report consumer, but in my mind, I still call it end user. And so I'm working more on trying to change it to report consumer. And I'm in the process of developing a part two to this so that I could get into specifics that are more technical in nature and less philosophical in nature. But it's funny, and I guess we're right at the top of the hour, so I can start talking about this a little bit. But it's funny, Power BI is very similar to a CRM system in that it's very difficult to get everyone in the organization to use it. It's something that people could resist using. And if they wanted to, they could resist using. They might not be the best employee at that point, and they're probably not if they're going to resist something that is becoming a strategy within an organization, but they could resist using it. So we have to be very thoughtful in how we approach bringing in this user. So we're going to be talking about end user or report consumer adoptions and how we can work on making some Power BI champions within our own organization. This is a little bit about me. I am Belinda Allen. I currently live in Charleston, South Carolina, though I do consider myself a New Yorker. I lived there longer than anywhere else in my life. I've been a Microsoft partner for over 30 years. I think I'm coming close to 32 years now. As of last Monday, I hit 11 years as MVP with Microsoft. So I'm super excited about that. Oh, I should make that 6 now in Power BI. I just edited the 11 a few minutes ago. I am also a Microsoft certified trainer. I've co-authored a couple books on ERP and business intelligence, and I just love learning. So it's a good thing because in the Power BI space, if you don't love learning, you definitely aren't going to get anywhere. So as I mentioned, this is, I have a couple topics. So my MVP topic, and now I guess I should also add 2023 on here, is diversity in technology, trying to just be a little more inclusive everywhere I go and try to encourage more and more people of diversity. But my topic of the year for this calendar year personally is this user adoption of Power BI. It's something I'm pretty passionate about. So I want to talk about who this session is for. Now, it's for anyone who falls into these typical roles from Microsoft. And this is a variation, this circle area that you're used to seeing in a Microsoft. You've probably seen it on roles many times, accessing the data, cleaning it, mashing it up. These are kind of data ingest and developer roles, explore and visualizing, data analyst, and sharing is admin, maybe not so much for the admin, but these roles may be multiple people in your organization. It may be one person. You may have any variety of these, but these are the people that I want to be talking to about how to do this. Now, who is it about? It's about that end user, that report consumer. And this is who I'm talking about. And I go back, my career started right out of college. I was working in the hotel business, and some of you may have heard of Hampton Inn hotels. And I was at one of the very early Hampton Inns, and I was general manager at the ripe young age of 24. And one of the things I did every Friday is I told my front desk staff for the weekend what they could negotiate down. Now, we had a business hotel, so we were sold out Sunday, usually Sunday, but not always, Monday through Thursday for sure. So Friday and Saturday, I didn't want rooms to sit empty, so I would tell them what they could negotiate down to, where I knew I was still making money and I knew that I was improving the numbers and the analytics for my particular hotel by increasing occupancy. Providing this information down to that employee who wasn't even a manager, which, by the way, being a front desk clerk is also one of my favorite jobs I've ever had. I would love to do it again at some point, maybe for fun. But going all the way back to that individual, giving them the power to negotiate through information is incredible. But I was only able to give them that information because I used analytics on a regular basis to evaluate what my numbers were. Now, this is an idea sessions. And not necessarily a how-to session. I do have some links that I'll be sharing with you throughout. And if you'd like a copy of the slides, the slide deck, I'll give you a URL and a QR code that you could use to get access to that. So the agenda is we're going to talk about why user adoption is important. And then we're going to spend a lot of time talking about why some people resist. And we're going to go into some specific stories from my experience. I've succeeded and failed in both all of these categories multiple times, so I've learned a lot about it. In 30-something years, it wasn't implementing BI all of that time, but I have always been someone who has worked on reports and visuals. That's just been my thing always. So working with the ERP systems, I have a lot of experience to draw upon and a lot of crazy stories. So, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So why is user adoption important? We want people in our company to be able to embrace technology because we want to implement strategies and tactics that are going to help us improve our business. And in order to do this, they need to be able to dig into the data. So it's incredibly important. And I know we all think we build beautiful reports. Actually, I personally don't, but I've taken a whole new thought process on that. But most people think they build these gorgeous reports. And just like the movie Field of Dreams, they think if you build it, they will come. But that is certainly not true. Sometimes these beautiful reports and these beautiful plans just don't get adopted. I like to tell the story about this was many, many years ago back in DOS days. I was still using, Windows had just come out, but I was still using Lotus 1-2-3. I had Excel. My business partner, who was also my husband, kept saying, try Microsoft Excel. And I'm like, no, I love Lotus 1-2-3. Why would I switch? Why would I switch? And I was basically a resistor. And then one time I had to convert a column of text from one column to two. We know that in Excel as text to columns. I could not remember how to do this parsing inside of Lotus 1-2-3. I didn't do it very often, and it was always a struggle to find out where to do it. So something inside me said, hey, give it a try in Power BI or in Excel. And I said, okay, I'll try it in Excel. And I immediately found text to columns, and I did it in a matter of seconds. And from that moment forward, I became an Excel champion. I started showing people things. So as a champion, not only did I use it, but I encouraged other people to use it. And I loved learning more and more, like what else can it do for me that's easy to do and make my job easier personally. And this is what becoming a champion is all about. So I became an Excel champion. And again, this was in the early 90s. So this was back in Windows 3.1.4, I think, if any of you remember that. And so I became a champion and been one ever since. So this is the first link I'm going to share with you. Now, this link from Microsoft is really for the Power Platform, but it applies to basically, in my opinion, anything that you're going to do. It's an adoption workbook you could see here in the gray area on creating user adoption for the Power Platform. It covers all the other Power Platforms. I'm not sure why Power BI isn't included in it, but there are some really good best practices and discussion in here. So I've just given you the link. The workbook is an 80 some odd page PowerPoint that you can get. And so I encourage you to go ahead and download that. But before we get into more about what a champion is, let's talk about user adoption. So when we get into user adoption here, this is one of the things in the book, is another reason I encourage it, is because it guides you through on what you need to do. Don't just build a report and think they're going to come to you. That is not the way it's going to work for most people. There are some people who are innovators that are you build it and they'll come and they'll add to it and give you a lot of value. But for most people, it's not going to work that way. So when we're talking about champions, we're talking about this whole onboarding employee section here. And this is what we're going to focus on. And another page from the report, this actually comes right through here. You see here they have champions, and I've circled it, and they encourage you, I love this, to go ahead and populate who your champions are if you know who they are ahead of time. And then you could work with them to create the other users into either just adopting it or becoming champions for you. And you could see the champion is someone who helps evangelize Power Platform, create a circle of influence, and can provide feedback to the adoption team about what works and what doesn't work. And you saw in my story, that was something I became. I started providing, I started sharing and influencing more and more people to use Excel at that particular point in time. So focusing on champions, not only are they driving awareness and adoption, but they're also become the go-to person. And you could see this is also from the slide, and I added in Power BI. It wasn't actually in there, but this still applies. They're the go-to person. So all of you have in your office or at your customer sites, that go-to person for Excel. Everyone knows, oh, go see Barbara. Barbara's the Excel genius, so we're going to go to Barbara, or Mr. Bill, Mr. Bill Jellin, Mr. Excel. So go to them. They're the ones who are going to be able to help it. So we need to identify who the champions are for our Power BI, because they are going to constantly work on making it better, and they're going to influence a lot of people to start using it. Now, can you create a succeed with your Power BI strategy? Without champions, you can, but it's going to be incredibly difficult to do. So save yourself a lot of grief and a lot of time. And actually here I'm referencing another champion page, so I'm going to go ahead and put that link in as well. All right. As we move on, so we need champions for data culture to exist. We need it if we want to have data culture to exist in our company. So the champion you can see here is on the left. It's the little mascot helping everybody work in unison and do everything. If you don't have champions, this is what it's going to look like. There'll be one or two person maybe pulling up and doing the wave, but you're going to have a lot of despair, and chances are your methodology and a lot of your reports just might flat out fail. And that would reflect on you, when really and truly it's just that you had some dissenters in there that were preventing things from happening. Now, oddly enough, I'm in technology and I work primarily with financial systems, but my degree was in marketing. And there is something in marketing called the 3-11 rule. Something good happens, you tell 3 people. Something bad happens, you tell 11 people. Think about the last time you went to a restaurant, you had a really good experience. How many people did you tell? And then think about a time where you went to a restaurant and you had a bad experience. Forgive me for even saying this, but maybe there was a hair on your plate. And how many people did you tell about that? Chances are you told way more people about the bad experience than you did the good experience. And using these numbers, this means we need 4 champions for every 1 resistor. And this is why building champions is so important. And now let's talk about why some people dissent or resist. So you might hear me call them the resistors or dissenters as we go along. Now, again, I'm referencing the slide deck that I prompted you to download for the next 4 slides, just because I want to hit a couple high points in here. And I want to help you decide whether you want to take your time to download that giant slide and look through it. It talks about why resistance can be expected. It's a natural reaction to change, and people are comfortable with the status quo, meaning they like the way the things are. Most people are not comfortable with change. I happen to be someone who loves change. I always think there's a better way and a better mousetrap. And I'm someone who's always rearranging my office and always rearranging how I do certain things. And this is a result of that. And so you need to anticipate it, and don't be surprised. Be prepared for it. You need to start thinking about it, and we'll talk about that more in just a second. You also need to have some plans in place as people begin resisting, so you understand exactly where they are. And finding a motivator is one of the biggest things, and that's one of the things we're going to start talking about in just a few moments. But the biggest thing when I talk about preparing for it is when you create your plan to perhaps implement Power BI altogether, implement maybe Synapse or something in Synapse or something big, you need to go ahead and address with the leadership that we expect a certain number of people to dissent or resist. And you could talk about why, you could show them the typical reasons, and these are the plans we're going to take in order to do this. So if and when, and it's usually going to be the when, someone resists, then you already have addressed, hey, this is likely to happen and we have a plan to follow it. It's very normal. And one of the big things here, and this is something that my group from Saturday morning that meets every day. We talked about this a little bit today. There's a big difference when you're starting to implement Power BI in delivering a report of, hey, this is what I need. Okay, here's your report, versus building something that allows people to do self-service discovery and analysis and trying to learn what it is they don't know about their business so they can improve things. So being able to plan this right from the start, and you can address it right away is something big. And this is just a page that I really like in the book where it talks about common resistant themes and some opportunities to mitigate those. But I handpicked a couple of the resistant themes from that particular slide deck, and I've listed them here. And these are the ones I'm going to address. People don't have time. People don't know what to build. People are not passionate, meaning they're not warming up to the idea. They don't see the value. We're going to talk about each of these in more detail. But on this not passionate one, they're saying, hey, it's not in it for me, right? And then people are worried there's not going to be sufficient training for the new ways of working. And people don't like change. They don't want change, period. I know my job. I don't want to change my task. And the last two, I tend to kind of put them together because sometimes not worrying that they have enough change, I usually find this falls into the situation of I'm worried I'm going to become embarrassed because I won't know how to do what I need to do or look it up. And that's something you really need to pay attention to. If going back to my whole MVP goal for the last several years in diversity, there are a lot of people out there that have different levels of anxiety. And one of them is social anxiety. And social anxiety is not being afraid of social situations. It's being afraid of that people are judging you unrealistically. And so they can become embarrassed very easy if, for example, they think that they're not able to know how to do something. And so we need to help them through this because, you're just not going to be able to beat it into them. And training isn't going to necessarily help as well. So you have to take a different approach for that altogether. Now, one of my favorite business gurus of the actually, the last decade and a half, really, is Simon Sinek. And he said something that fits in exactly with what I was always taught all those years of working with ERP systems on selling ERP. And his statement was, value is something people feel, not something we tell them they get. And in selling ERP systems, it was always people buy benefits, not features. And basically, to me, they're saying the same thing. So we need to show the benefits to these users as we go along. And these are both excellent books of his if you're interested. But we need to talk with them and understand things. And one of the things that I have found to be the most successful in getting and gaining user adoption is just asking the question, if I could do anything to make your job easier, what would it be besides answering the phone? And I love to add the besides answering the phone, one, because I think it's funny, but two, because I want them to realize I'm asking a question beyond what they think I'm capable of helping them with. Because a lot of times people will give you a response that they didn't think you could help with, but it's totally within your range because they may have found a workaround that is just an incredible time suck, for lack of a better word. Now, as we go through those reasons that people dissent, we're going to work on our group. So we're implementing a Power BI strategy to these new end users. And as always, there is someone who is an innovator. They're going to adopt user technology. They're going to take one look at it and they're going to go, cool, I want it. And then on the opposite end of that, there's always going to be at least one dissenter, one naysayer. And now the question is, everyone else is in the middle. So who's going to win over all of these users? If the dissenter wins them over, then that means we stand no chance. So we need to spend our time, and I forgot to click on my little slides here. We need to spend our time on the blue section in the middle. We need to work with the innovator, but we need to sway these people and even the dissenter whenever possible. So this is where we're going to be focusing on now. Let's talk about the first reason. People don't have time. Now, I told you what I like to ask people. If I could do anything to make your job easier, what would it be besides answer the phone? I did this on a client. I happened to be in New York. This is where most of my clients were at the time. And this was about 4 years ago. Now I only work with partners typically now, but except for training. But I was at a client's office that I had for years. We had sold our business and we all went to New York just to visit with clients. And I was sitting at the table at one particular customer site. And I said, hey, to the controller, if I could do anything to make your job easier today, what would it be? And he thought about it. And at the end of the meeting, he said, I know, it would be remove empty batches. And I thought, remove empty batches? And okay, so all kinds of alarms went off in my head, and I'm not going to get into the long story, but short story is that it was an accounting system that does batch formatting. They had a requisition system. Every time the requisition system brought in invoices, it would create a separate batch. And to approve it, it was too cumbersome for him to approve all these individual batches. So he had somebody else manually move them all to the same batch, and hence they had empty batches. So I'm like, no. I heard a lot of problems. The first problem I heard was it's difficult for you to approve all of these small batches. So I created a Power BI report and I put a Power App on it. And this isn't a real screenshot, but you can see where the Power App goes. It's a very simple Power App. And what this enabled them to do is look at all the unposted patches in payables, and I could also sort by filter by vendor or by department, and I could see where everything was coded to in the general ledger to make it significantly easier to review the batches. So I have completely saved him tons of time here. And then I made the app where he could just select one of the batches and click a button, and it would approve the batch in the ERP system, all from within this report. This saved him 4 hours a week minimum. That's 208 hours a year. That is a pretty good vacation, right? So that's a 5 week. It's 5 weeks? 5 weeks? Yeah, 5 weeks vacation. That's a ton of time that I just saved the controller, not even to mention the time that the AP clerk saved having to move all those transactions over, and then the way they were having to manually empty those or delete those empty batches. So back to our new users, I convert that controller over very easily by saving them time. That was a benefit, 4 hours of time. Now, 4 hours a week may, in the grand scheme of things, may not sound like much, but if you're having to stay late an hour every day, especially in New York City, you can get on the train an hour earlier, you might cut your commute time down to, by 3 hours. So you have to think about things like that. Another story, a similar story, was looking at sales orders that are on hold for whatever reason. Simply, this is basically the exact same content. This is a Power App over in the bottom right corner where I could remove the hold for the item that was pulled up. But I've actually added in Power BI, I was able to add in fields that didn't even exist in the accounting system, meaning I look at the balance for the customer, because this is a credit hold. I look at the balance for the customer. I see there are $10,000 of payments not posted yet, and there are $2,000 of invoices not posted yet. If those were both posted, the new balance would be a negative 1,000, meaning they've overpaid. They have a 4,000 credit limit. So sure, I'm going to release this posting or release this credit limit. This saves me a ton of time from having to look up and do anything. So basically, we need to look for the worst itch that people have, and we need to scratch it. Now, another common resistance theme is people don't know what they want to build. I had one customer, I wished I was kidding. They literally bought me a server with SharePoint Online, and I implemented about 4 different ways for them to get visual statements for their board of directors. And this went on for years. It wasn't until that controller retired and somebody was promoted with the white rank. She came to one of my Power BI classes. She went back, she built a report, she hired an intern, and they immediately had reports. I mean, it was just like boom, 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 after years of it. And so amazing, amazing thing. But people don't know what they want to build. So we have a couple of things we can do about that. First of all, I think, the data analyst, we're talking about the report consumers. So let's let the data analyst come up with what the reports are. And we could do things like adding in personalizations. So you could see here we have the personalization icon. And sorry, I've got my really bad circles and highlights on here. But the personalization icon where they can go in and create personalizations as they see fit. So they could edit the reports only and then bookmark them, even though the original report will remain intact. So they could start experimenting themselves on what they want to see. So we don't have to worry about that. And you could just turn that on if you are not familiar with that under options, current file, report settings, and go ahead and turn it on. I do want to point out, if you want to add perspectives to it, then meaning give it a little more control and a little more security, then you could use Tabular Editor 2, which is free, or if you're already using Tabular Editor 3, you can create perspectives there, and then with each visual assign a perspective to it. So do want to point that out. Another thing we can do to make it easier for our users is through the use of Synapse. If we're creating a view in Synapse, and then we go through and we create a data set using that view, which is very controlled and very small, and let them do a little bit of service research and experimentation on their own, that's another great way to give people some control over the idea of they don't know what they want to build. And then just be able to do simple things like that, you're going to convert somebody else as well, because now they know, okay, I have these reports, I know they can change. And one of the things that we need to remind users is that when we use Power BI, it's a strategy, it's business intelligence. It should not stay the same, right? Every time we sit down and start doing analysis on our reports, we should find a new aha moment that we want to build some kind of visual or storytelling board around. Now, it's not going to be, each one isn't going to have the same impact, but you should find something that you could use. So there should be changes to it all around. And that's one of the things we need to work on with that particular end user is you don't know what you want to build. Well, it should be different every time. So let's go ahead and start with the experimentation. Now, people are not passionate. They're not warming up to the idea. They don't see the value. Okay. Enter Simon Sinek again. So we want to show them the value. We want to show them the benefit of using these reports. And part of that has to do with that aha moment that I just mentioned and how we can create and promote people to do self-service and exploration. And most people don't know how. So we need to show them some simple tools that they could use to do their own analysis. One of my friends, I don't know if she's on the call, she just said to me this morning, Sheila Hart, she's amazingly smart. I always tell all of them I love having smart friends, but she showed the company that she's at now, the decomposition tree. And in the decomposition tree, she was surprised that they hadn't used it and they were like, oh, wow, this is awesome. But this is a very simple way to show users how they could do their own analysis on data in a very, very simple format. They could either just click whatever the explain by is, or they could use the AI like we have over here. You can see the AI option was used here, either show the high or show the low. So this is a very simple way for them to be able to utilize this. The key influencer, a little more complex. I would start with the decomp tree, but there's a lot of AI built into the system, and let them start learning from that. There's also the explain the increase and decrease in some of your clustered column charts if you're using like a date on one of your axes. So a lot of things that you can do there. And that, again, is going to drive some people over into becoming an innovator or becoming a champion of Power BI, because now all of a sudden they're like, hey, I can do data analysis myself. This is cool and it's easy. So let's get going with this. Now, one of my favorite things to do and something I love to implement is Q&A. And, I find it doesn't get the love that it deserves. It is so, now that we can put it in the Power BI report and it's not just in the dashboard, I like to create a page for users that has 4 equally sized Q&A reports. Whoops, sorry. I clicked back somehow. This allows users to use a suggested question or ask their own question. And if they do this for all 4 of them, they have just created their own dashboard, which also goes back to the thing, I don't know what I want to build. Well, they can make it something that they question and review a lot. So this is a great way, because it will be an interactive report as well. And so especially if you've created from Synapse this nice compact view to allow them to dig into one particular area of data, then they can create their own interactive dashboards, and who knows what they're going to find. So I love doing this. And after they populate this, they can, in the Power BI service, save it or bookmark it that way, and it will not change the fact that it'll keep it for them, but it will not change the fact that these are actually Q&A things and they could use it themselves. So this is a great way to encourage users to promote them to learning more about how do I become a data analyst without them realize that they're even learning to do that. And don't forget the Q&A tooling window where you can set up the questions. You could suggest your questions here on the bottom. Don't forget, once you enter in the first question, all of the default questions will have disappeared. So keep that in mind. But you can put in questions that are most likely ones are going to ask. You can review or teach questions. So if somebody uses clients instead of customers, we can teach Q&A that client is a synonym for customers. There's a couple places we can put synonyms in. And you could even review questions across the board on all of your Power BI reports in the service and see what people are asking, because these may be other areas that maybe require from whoever's doing the real data analysis or the more experienced data analysis, I guess I should say, that maybe we need to do some reports around theirs and do some evaluations. But the use of Q&A is going to make it easier for somebody else. People are comfortable with Bing, they're comfortable with Google, so why not? Another use case. Now, people are worried there won't be sufficient training for new ways of working. And again, this has to do with user adoption. I've already talked a little bit about, I'm trying to get to my, link here. Okay. And having some mentoring is going to be a really good idea. Perhaps have some office hours that you set up for people just to come to you. I find a lot of people really do work well with that. The Center of Excellence, if you're implementing that, that's another way to do it. But this is something that's going to really help. And so for this, there are a couple things I like to do to help people out as they are learning. One of them, we should all be taking advantage of smart narratives. Smart narratives are, to quote, or to paraphrase, my friend Chris Wagner, is kind of the newspaper of what you're seeing on the screen. So a lot of people are comfortable with reading text And so if you give them something, and this is interactive, so when they learn on it, they could read about what they're doing. This is going to be something that's going to be incredibly helpful for them in the learning process. So it's something I totally recommend. And that alone, I guarantee you, notice I pulled over the older gentleman who is, I don't know, I'm getting closer to his age group than I am everyone else on the screen. So, but they're usually, especially the C levels, they're not always people who are going to grasp that very quickly. Another method is on your reports, put visuals that maybe pop up screens that explain it a little bit more, or that drill down to another guide page, but take advantage of using bookmarks, tooltips, and actionable buttons to help you improve the learning, because that is going to drive more and more people over than you think. And one of the things I want to talk about right here, and this is something that my next phase of this user adoption is going to go into, is I am starting to think, I already mentioned that my reports aren't pretty. I always never thought, I mean, I am blown away by how some people do reports. And you know the reports I'm talking about. When you look at them, you're like, wow, this is so cool. I'm not sure those reports are for everybody. And I'm beginning to think that reports should maybe be done in, at a minimum of 2 different levels, maybe more, but one for the people who are just getting into and learning to absorb. Not that you wouldn't give access to both, but one where people can learn to absorb how to use the tool, how to interact with it, and making those screens cleaner, putting fewer visuals on it, making sure all the visuals on the page relate to each other. This is going to be a way that you can truly help those users gain confidence in using the system. So more on that as I continue on my power adoption journey. I'm halfway through the year, and I feel like I'm not even a quarter of the way through the ideas and thoughts on it. So it may end up being my 2023 idea as well. Who knows? But people don't like change. They don't want change, period. So there are a ton of people who don't like change. I remember one time I was implementing a purchase order requisition system at a client site, and one of the department heads actually told me, it's like, hey, they did training. And he's like, I don't know what I'm going to buy or who I'm going to buy it from. How can I do a requisition? And I'm like, what do you do? Do you just randomly dial a number on the phone and say, hey, send me stuff, I'll pay you for it? I mean, at some point you have to have an idea, even if it changes, even if who you're buying it from changes, you have to have an idea of what you're going to need to get a requisition. I thought that was one of the craziest things that I ever thought of. But along with people who don't like change, think about where they work. Where are they working in? Are they working from a phone or a tablet? In that case, they might want to use some of the downloadable apps, the mobile apps that are out there. Even the mobile app on a desktop might be beneficial. So if you go to the Microsoft Store and you look at Power BI by itself, make sure it's not the one that says Power BI desktop, you actually get the mobile experience on the desktop. And the cool thing about this is it takes away a lot of the noise that we see in Power BI service. I am a giant fan of apps for that reason. I think they take away the noise. And when there's less, like we have all this stuff in a workspace, and which workspace do I go into, and do I go into the one that looks like a data set or the one that looks like a report? I don't know. Or the dashboard? I don't know. It's confusing to me. That automatically, if someone looks at something and they gets a little discombobulated right from the beginning, you're going to have a hard time getting them back. So find out where they work and where they need to go to reduce the learning curve. Teams is another great example. If they're comfortable in Teams, then have them put their Power BI app inside of Teams. That will save a lot of grief. If they are an Excel person, oh boy, they're really easy to win over at that point. All you have to do is show them the Power BI data set and how to use it inside of Excel. And not only, especially if you're implementing something, not only will you have an innovator and a champion who will be willing to help you vet out and verify the numbers in the data set, but now all of a sudden they're becoming comfortable and an expert on the data set itself, which is going to make it a lot easier for them to move into Power BI. So anyone who's the Excel guru is someone who's going to help you a lot. Whoops, clicked one slide too many. And then there's the user experience. Do not underestimate the user experience, the UX. The UI is the user interface, how everything's laid out, but how the user interacts with it is the user experience. And I would recommend, if you ever at a conference and you see somebody like for Power Apps talking about the UX, I would recommend attending, because you could learn a lot about that for your Power BI reports as well. This is a screenshot from my mobile phone. I took it obviously on March 8th at 11:08 a.m. I live in South Carolina. My husband was like, "What are the cases doing now?" We were out on our way to pick up lunch. And I said, "I don't know." So I opened it up and I'm like, 91. He goes, "Is that today, or is that month to date or year to date?" And I'm like, "I don't know. It doesn't say." And so I totally recommend that you make it understandable for people. A good book that I recommend, and this is a really small book, is Don't Make Me Think. A lot of programmers use this book. It is, I'll put in the link in a few moments for that. But even if you don't get it, these are things, attributes for usability that we need to focus on for making our reports better for those end users. Is it useful? Is it learnable? Oh, that's a big one. Is it memorable? Is it effective, efficient? Is it desirable and delightful? They must enjoy using it. We want to make sure we encourage delightful. So make the experience delightful for your end users. And then as I'm looking, okay, good, I'm good on time. Naming conventions, very big deal to me. I ask people a lot. Especially, I like to embrace the space. That's one of the things I say. Put spaces in your query names, put spaces in your column names, partly because it's easier for users to understand, but also because it is better for Q&A as well. So use cost space of space goods. If someone wants to know cost of goods, they're going to type it in as cost of goods instead of CST_GDS. They don't know what that means. And then you're going to be setting up synonyms like crazy. So embrace the space. Also, you can take advantage then that the default titles that appear in some of your visuals are going to be something that is a little more user-friendly as well. So we want to make it as easy for the people who are consuming the reports as possible. And that's another thing you can do with Azure Synapse that I love when you're creating those views. I like to go ahead and put the naming convention in the views themselves so that when you use them, they are coming over automatically in a name that is user-friendly, that is in your company's tribal language. What do you use? What do you call things? So let's use those particular fields and not the default fields that the data is set up in. And one of the things, based off the conversation that my SML group had this morning that I hadn't even really thought about, when you're creating those views, and I got to give my friend Daniel Messner a big shout out for this, because he gave me this serious aha moment. The data itself is stored in a manner typically, well, that's good for warehousing, but it may be stored in a manner that is also good for an application to use, like the application where the data came from. I mean, not necessarily formatted in a way that's best for business intelligence optimization. So create those views that are pre-formatted and designed for business intelligence operations, where as much modeling is done there as you can possibly do. Part of that Roche's maxim, do modeling as far upstream as possible and downstream as necessary. This is a good place in which to do that. And make sure that you hide things that are I immediately go in and hide in the fact tables, all of the links, because if, for example, I want to look at a report based on the clothing ID, I want to get it from the clothing table, not the sales ID. And the reason for that is if I have multiple fact tables, the filter is not going to propagate to the other fact table. So we always want them filtering from the dimension tables. That's really what they're meant for, and not from the fact tables. So make sure you hide some of those. Hide anything that could be confusing or that's just used for calculations for your users. I also like taking advantage. You can see here, I'm taking advantage of folders in my table. That is another great way to do that. If you have a lot of fields, especially, it makes it much, much easier for the users if they could collapse up some of the folders and they're organized well. But if you don't highlight these, not only is it the filter being the issue, because in this case, filtering clothing from here wouldn't affect anything else, but it would be very confusing to the user. Why is there clothing ID in both places? Which one should I use? And if I'm looking at clothing ID here, I'm going to still see all of the descriptions up here, and then that might get confusing to me. So make it easier for yourself. And that's going to help bring more people over. Now, will these tips work for all non-innovators? No. But we are hoping that peer pressure will kick in as well. And sometimes it does, because when somebody's standing at the water cooler and saying, hey, that Power BI report, I realize it saves me about 4 hours a week, then that's going to put pressure on some of the other people. Now, my company has, and it's also my own personal mission statement, to improve the lives and business success of all of my customers and partners. And I remember, oh gosh, this must have been in the mid 90s. I said that to one customer, and as we were implementing a new ERP system, and later she came to me, the payroll person came to me, and she said, I thought that was the stupidest thing I've ever heard anyone say, that you wanted to improve my life. She goes, with this system, I no longer have to come in on a Saturday every quarter to do my quarterly returns. So that's a Saturday every quarter that I get to stay at home with my kids. And she goes, you did improve my life. She goes, I just had to tell you that. And that was something that stuck with me a lot. So that made me super happy. That wasn't an awful lot of time, but that's 4 Saturdays a year that she didn't have to come into work, and she was able to stay home, and she was still doing her job efficiently. So people will talk about those things. They might not do it in the numbers. Remember the 311 rule as the naysayers, but they will talk about them. So hopefully we can convert them. And so in that case, if everyone else is converted, you may not really win over the dissenter, but at least they'll become neutralized. So sometimes that's the best that we can hope for. So now we're at time, and I am open to any kind of questions or comments.